So we're going to continue with Job. I'm getting an awful lot out of Elihu. This time around anyway, it seems like it's a lot more productive for me in my thoughts. And so we're in 35, okay? And we're getting really close to the end. We only have 35, 36, and 37 before the Lord speaks, okay? So we'll see how far we can get to today. All right. Then this is Elihu's third series of rebuttals. Then Elihu continued and said, "Do you think this is according to justice? Do you say my righteousness is more than God's?" Which is what that's what he's heard. He's saying, I'm more right than God. And people think this. They really do. People think that they could run the world better than God or run their lives better than God. They wouldn't let certain things happen in their lives that God lets happen, which questions his judgment about how to run his own universe, and especially such a small world. Think about it. Isaiah 40 says that the nations are as a drop in the bucket. Well, if the nations are a drop in the bucket, and not just one generation of nations, but the entire nation, you're talking about billions of people, and you're talking about two or three, your own individual life, right? You're just a molecule in that drop, basically. And if God can't manage your life, we're all in trouble, really. But his ways are not our ways. We just don't understand them. It's just the way it is. Okay. So he's saying, I am more right than God, is what he's trying to say, which God does bring up with him later. Okay. 3, for you say, what advantage will it be to you? What profit shall I have more than if I had sinned? And this is, again, people say this. They said, how come it's such a hard thing to do the right thing, and it comes to nothing? What's the point of it? This is what Job is saying. Say that's a very common human thing, and it's like Asaph in Psalm 73. He felt that, he said, let's turn there, because I want to quote that, Psalm 73, verses 12 to 14. It's not David, this is Asaph, who is a priest. Okay, he's a Levite priest. Psalm 73, over there. Okay. Psalm 73, behold, these are the wicked, who are always at ease. They have increased in wealth. Looks like they're being blessed by God, is the point he's trying to make. Surely in vain I've kept my heart pure. So it's look, Job and Asaph, two great saints of the Old Testament, are saying the same thing. Surely in vain I've kept my heart pure. In other words, I've lived a right life. I've been very careful with my life. And look at these people. They're like blessed out of their socks, all the time. And I've washed my hands in innocence. In other words, I've always, repented of whatever I did was wrong. I got right with God and so forth. Okay. And he says, for I have been stricken all day long and chastened every morning. In other words, he can't get a break, it seems. That's what he's saying. He says, I can't get a break. I'm chastened and stricken and afflicted all day long. For what? Right? Now, 15 though. If I had said, I will speak thus, or speak according to this, behold, I would have betrayed the generation of thy children. Because when I pondered to understand this, it was troublesome or weary in my sight. And that's true. When we think about the things that people get away with, it's a weary weight, right? Until I came into the sanctuary of God, then I perceived their end. Now he's getting perspective. So now these Caesars are going to die and they're going to be cut off. Now he's, at least, he knows God's going to set everything right. So that's the important thing. God will set everything right. So that's Asaph talking. Now, okay. All right, continue. Let's go back to Job there. All right. He says, I will answer you and your friends with you. In other words, he's addressing the whole older group. Look at the heavens and see, and behold the clouds, they are higher than you. If you have sinned, what do you accomplish against him? And if your transgressions are many, what do you do to him? So what he's saying is, he's saying, look up at the clouds, all right? Look up at the clouds and if you sin, how would you even affect the clouds? Oh, we're just going to be billowing across the sky, and you're down there doing whatever evil you're doing, killing somebody, stealing from somebody, or whatever else you're doing. And the clouds just go on by, mindless and heedless of your activity. If clouds which are made by God or are suspended above us are not affected by our sins, how much less is God affected by our sins? He's not personally hurt. You can't hurt him. What would you shoot at him? A rocket? A nuclear bomb? Would you aim something at him and you can't hurt him, right? What you can do, though, is offend him. That's the difference. God's offended by evil and enraged by evil, but he's not personally harmed by it. We're harmed by it. So, he's untouchable this way. Okay. Now, we certainly harm his creation or other creatures by our sins, or ourselves, our own soul. So that's what the offense is. Remember when David committed Bathsheba, then ended up killing Uriah to cover up the pregnancy. It says, and this thing was displeasing in the sight of the Lord. And when I read that in New American, it's like, that's kind of understated, displeased, Actually, he was pretty upset. You can imagine when he was watching all this going on, right? And then he sees the plot against Uriah, carrying his own death sentence in his own hand to take to Joab as a co-conspirator, and that he ends up in the battle, in a battle that was deliberately designed to fail, so that he could die in it, along with some friends. David only wanted Uriah dead, but Joab reconfigured the whole plot to send a bad campaign up against a wall, where he was killed along with some other. So the best place to hide a murderer is in a battlefield, because you can't tell why he died. You assume he died by battle. But God's like looking at this, right? It's like, he's watching this whole thing, So then he went after him. And then he had consequence, but Psalm 51 comes out of it. One of the best known Psalms in the whole Bible is, the Psalm 51. And that's a psalm for the sinner who repents. But his consequences remained. Until the day he died, but he still had faith in God all that time he was under judgment. So anyway, so if your transgressions are many, what do you do to him? Nothing, right? And if you are righteous, here's the opposite side of the picture. And if you are righteous, what do you give him? Or what does he receive from your hand? Nothing. If you're good, God gets nothing out of it. Zero. Just like he can't be hurt by your sin, he can't be blessed by your good act. What he is, though, since he's displeased with evil, he's pleased with watching a righteous person do the right thing. So he's happy about that. That's the difference. He's offended by sin, but he is pleased to see his creatures living right, which means he can continue to blessing. That's what it means. But he's not personally benefited by it, despite what people think. And he's telling this to Job, because there's something in Job's words that indicate that he needs to hear this. At least that's what I would take Elihu to be doing here. Okay. All right. Verse 8, your wickedness is for a man like yourself, and your righteousness is for a son of man. True. Our wickedness, if we commit evil, if you steal, let's say you steal from somebody, you harm their life, you kill them, you take their life. If you commit adultery with a woman, a married woman, then you've harmed your neighbor. If you lied about him in court, you've taken away his reputation. Maybe he might be imprisoned over it, things like that. So if you do wickedness, it's affecting only people. It affects people like yourself. That's as far as it goes, which is plenty bad, right? And if your righteousness is also for a son of man, meaning whatever we do good, we do it for other people. Like, remember Jesus talked about that. He said, when you give alms, do it in secret. let not your left hand know what your right hand's doing. So whatever righteousness we do, whatever good things we do, are for other people, not to God. It's not to Him, per se. Now, the only caveat that I would say is in the law, the tithing regulation. The Lord made it so that His own ministers, which were His personal ministers out of the tribes of Israel, were to be paid by the tax laid on the other 11 tribes. So, if they didn't tithe, those Levites and priests didn't do the sacrifices necessary for the nation to stay good with God. So that's why He said, "You robbed God." Remember, He said He robbed God in Malachi 3. Well, in other words, it sounds like He's personally injured. Well, not really. I mean, the thing is that He made it so that they would be paid that way. So His regulation is to be paid that way. In other words, He could supernaturally pay them, like out of heaven, so to speak. But He put a tax on the other tribes. So they're robbing Him in the sense that His own ministers, He can't meet His payroll. That's the idea. He can't meet His payroll. So, but again, this is a self-imposed kind of loss on His part. It's self-imposed, not something that directly affects. I just thought of that. I never thought of that before, but that's interesting. Okay. So when Peter talks about our ministry, he said, "Let everyone minister according to the grace that God gives you for the general profit that is among people." 1 Corinthians 12 says, "The gifts of the Spirit are for the common good." So when we give out food or something like that, or clothing, whatever John the Baptist told people to do, basically it's only for ourselves. But God is pleased with watching that activity because He likes to see generosity in His own people. So the point He's making, He says, you can't affect God by whatever you do, okay? And you are like railing at Him to no effect, to no result, except your own harm. That's what He basically was trying to say, I think. Verse 9. Because of the multitude of oppressions, they cry out. They cry for help because of the arm of the mighty. This is very true, and it goes on in the world. People are often subjected to oppression by people who are powerful and rich and have the might to do so. So these people cry out for help, the oppressed, that is, because of the arm of the mighty, but no one says, "Where is God my maker, who gives songs in the night, who teaches us more than the beasts of the earth, and makes us wiser than the birds of the sky?" There they cry out, but He does not answer because of the pride of evil men. This took me a while to figure out what He was saying. And I thought this was very interesting, really interesting, because He's talking about the fact that people harming each other. So a person gets, let's say a group of people are harmed by another group of people. Let's take slave owners or something like that. Whatever it may be. The oppressed and the oppressors. The oppressed, they don't cry out saying, "Where's God my maker?" because they have pride. In other words, even though a person's oppressed, does not mean that he's not proud too. A proud person can be oppressed or afflicted or whatever under the gun. But when they cry out, they're not heard because they themselves are guilty of pride. So they don't say, "Where's God my maker?" Do you realize the humility it would take for that to be said by someone? Where's God my maker? If I say that God is my maker, I'm admitting something about myself and Him, which a proud person will not do. He's my maker means that I'm 100% made by God and sustained by God. Proud people do not admit this, even if they are oppressed. I thought that was interesting. Because just because someone's oppressed does not mean they're not evil. You know what I mean? An evil person could be oppressed. And today we have this victim mentality. If you're a victim, if you're in a certain class of people, you're automatically granted all kinds of privilege because of the color of your skin or your whatever your gender you think or whatever that stuff, that horrible stuff that goes on these days, right? In other words, they become the oppressed group. They become a victim, right? So, but they can do all manner of evil. In other words, the white is the racist, but not the black. See what I mean? But what the Lord's saying is that both sides are evil. The oppressed is evil, and the oppressor is evil in different ways. But the person who's oppressed does not cry out because of their pride. They don't acknowledge that God's their maker, and will continue to give songs in the night. In other words, that God is the reliever of affliction. A proud person does not admit this or even think it, that God would relieve their affliction. Then verse 11, who teaches us more than the beasts of the earth and makes us wiser than the birds of the sky. In other words, look at that. So God is a maker, a song giver, and a teacher. Proud people do not admit such things about God. Look at the world today. You got your academia. They all teach evolution. They all teach naturalism, right? They don't say God's their maker, God's their sustainer, that God's a teacher of my life. They will never admit this, to their own harm. So when they cry out, when the oppressed cry out, when they're proud, they're not heard. Because they won't give up their pride and what they are. Just because they're oppressed does not mean that God sees them as victims, so much so that he really, you know what I mean? Like, he doesn't look at them like man would look at them. Because you have all these people who are vested in making them a victim class. It's not what God sees. God sees evil in everybody. That's the point I believe Elihu is making. So even if a man transgresses another man, there's evil in that victim as well. Remember Jesus said, this is interesting. Jesus said, when the blind lead the blind, they both fall in the pit. I remember thinking about that one time, thinking, that doesn't seem quite fair. That's my flesh thinking. Doesn't seem quite fair. The blind leading the blind leader is the perp. The one being led is the victim. But they both fall in the pit. I remember I was at church back in the assembly, and after church service was over, this lady that I guess was a summer visitor, she was talking about, I hope I can remember, because I just thought of it. She was talking about someone who was harmed by some perp, and that whatever she said about the victim made her seem that she was righteous or something by becoming a victim. But that's our modern view. If you are a victim, you're righteous. That's a good way of looking at it, right? I never thought of that. If you're righteous, if you are a victim, you're a righteous person, and everyone else is evil. We're casting evil and good nowadays, right? Anyway, so I said to her, I said, well, pardon me. I said, you know that scripture in Luke where it says the blind lead the blind? She goes, yes. I said, and they both fall in the pit. I said, in your way of just saying what you just said, only the perp should fall in the pit and the victim should go free. She was like looking at me like, I said, Jesus said they both go in the pit. The reason the perp goes into the pit for leading the victim, but the victim goes in for other sins. Maybe he becomes bitter and unforgiving and harsh or whatever you want to say. He goes in the pit for that reason. So victim and perp and victim are both going. When a false teacher misleads a group, which is totally tragic. You listen about these cults, right? Jim Jones, William Branham, we've been watching that stuff. These people are being misled into hell over what they're hearing by a false con man. They're the victim. They should be set free. God sees more than we do. And all I'm saying is that the reason why that God does not answer them, and then we have in there verse 12, is because of their pride of the victim is still in them. So, but whenever a person humbles himself toward God, like the publican in the temple, remember he played, oh, God be merciful to me, the sinner. I mean, he's under the weight of conviction by the Holy Spirit. And he does the right thing. The Holy Spirit prompted him to go to get prayer. Pray about this for yourself. And then he left there justified. And he left in a good state. He left in a good spiritual state. That man walked home with peace in his heart. He had to have it because you know when you're justified. You know when that's lifted off you, because you've humbled yourself before God, right? So this is what I think he's going to Job about. He's telling Job to humble himself more than he has. That's my thought anyway. Let's continue. Verse 13, which is the summary of that. Surely God will not listen to an empty cry, nor will he regard it. Right. He will not listen to a proud victim crying out. Unless he humbles himself, then he will hurt. Because the thing is, an afflicted person is closer to humbling himself than the proud oppressor is. That's his only advantage. His advantage is that his afflictions might drive him to that state of humility. This is what I think, anyways, trying to say there, how much less when you say you do not behold him? Okay. But now I like New American here. I'm going to tell you what New American has in the end of verse 14 there. The case is before him, and you must wait for him. I don't know how your handles. I've seen different ways of handling it. Let's see. New King James has 14b. They use the word justice. Yet justice is before him, and you must wait for him. The word justice, I think, is too abstract. It doesn't give you really the feeling of what is. Justice is just a virtue. What does that mean? Justice is before him in general, or what? No, the case. Your case is before him. Wait. And I think that's one of the best little things in the whole chapter there. The case that you've been presenting is before God. Wait for him. He'll get to you. He's not letting you go. He's not negligent. I was thinking about that verse. I don't know where it is in Psalms. It says, I think it's maybe Psalm 139, actually. It says, if I should, the number of thoughts you have toward me are uncountable. They're more than the sand of the sea. To one person, God has a huge volume of thoughts about each one of us. Huge volumes. They can't even be counted. The amount of careful thought he has about, especially the people who have faith in Jesus. That's all the more, there's a lot more of them. And the thing is, the case is before him. He's not negligent on anything, but he wants to hear from you too, right? because that's the second part of us. God made man to be a co-worker with him, and because we're a junior partner in his work. See, that's how God made us. I was if I may, since I want to show you something I thought of on Saturday. I go to Matthew 9 on this point of God being a partner, because it's a little bit different than what we're talking about, but still. Matthew 9, the very end of the chapter there. Matthew 9 there. I might put this up as a video. I like the way it kind of came out. A little video. Go to verse 37. You'll recognize these, right? Verse 37 and 38. Then he said to his disciples, the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Therefore beseech the Lord of the harvest to send out workers into his harvest. Harvest meaning people, right? Souls to be saved. What's interesting is, this is one of the few little verses in the Gospels I know exactly where it is. I'll tell you why I know exactly where it is. Because a lot of I do know, a number of them I know exactly where it is, but not that many. Because I get it mixed up. Is it in Matthew? Is it in Luke? Is it in Mark? I don't always know. So this one I know. Because I know what chapter 10 is about. The chapter 10 is sending out the 12 apostles to heal and raise the dead and all that sort of, preach the gospel and all that sort of thing, right? But it's right at the tail end of this statement. So what I think happened here was that the Lord wanted them to pray for God to send out laborers into the harvest, right? The very next words is that they're getting sent out into the harvest. So it tells you a couple things right there. It tells you that, first of all, that they obeyed the Lord immediately. They went and had a prayer meeting about asking the Lord of the harvest to send forth laborers into the harvest. And the next thing you know, Jesus is commissioning them to do it. So this little thing that went in between them. So Jesus tells them to pray. Then they pray, then God the Father responds by telling Jesus to send them out. It's like a little circuit that takes place. It's a very interesting dynamic, actually. In other words, Jesus could have prayed for that privately, but he got them involved into the prayer, right? And he didn't send them out until they prayed, until he said this. But why did he do it? Why did he take this particular tack? I'll tell you why. Read 35 and 36 for the clue. So let's read verse 35 and 36. And Jesus was going about all the cities and the villages, teaching in their synagogues and proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom, and healing every kind of disease and every kind of sickness. And seeing the multitudes, he felt compassion for them, because they were distressed and outcast like sheep without a shepherd. He had compassion on the multitude. What he wanted to do, there was too many. He's in a single human body, and he can't get to them in a long time. They're going to scatter around. He can't get to He can't get to them. So what do you want? He wants to be able to multiply himself, to get more workers out that are doing the things he's doing. Because everything that he tells his apostles are doing in chapter 10, he's just been doing in verse 35 of chapter 9. Right? Okay. Why must they pray? Because they had to pray. Look what their prayer is. Think about what their prayer is. Lord, send forth laborers into the harvest. Help people get healed and saved. So what the Lord wanted, that word compassion is very important in the whole thing, because the Lord had compassion on them, and he wanted the men to have compassion as well. And the best way to get compassion for someone is to pray for them. Well, you mentioned that last week. You pray for somebody, it changes you. See, their views were like, I don't think they were as compassionate at all. Well, not at all. They somewhat. You remember when, I'll give you in Mark 10 or Matthew 19, there was an episode where the Lord, some parents were bringing their little babies to Jesus to bless them, right? And what did the apostles do? They shooed them away. You should get out of here. Get out of here. And Jesus was very displeased with that, and he rebuked them, and he said, no, let them come to me. For of such is the kingdom of heaven. Right? Well, or the episode where John says, we saw someone casting out demons in your name, and we told them to stop because they don't walk with us. He said, don't do that. He said, he wanted people to be helped. The apostles lacked the compassion necessary to become laborers in the harvest, because they're going to be dealing with people with sins. That's what they're going to be dealing with. And that's going to wear them out real fast. So what he wanted them to do is to have prayer, which connects themselves with God, and grace comes into them to have compassion that Jesus has to heal the sick and preach the gospel. I mean, it's a beautiful situation, right? So that's co-laboring, and it involves two things: the activity of ministry and the connection with God. They both went together, and they're necessary. They're a continuous loop. It's a triangle. You can't break the triangle without losing the triangle. You have to get all of them going. So anyway, how did I get on this topic? But whatever it was in Job made me think of it. I just wanted to say it. So I think I'm going to put this in a video, what I just said, because it's off topic a little bit. And so, but hope you don't mind. But let's go back to Job there, all right? Job 35, I think we were. Yeah. Well, whatever it was I thought of. Anyway, I can't recall now exactly how I got to that. But the case is before him. You must wait for him. So keep praying. This is Jesus said in Luke 18 about this. Even though the case is before him, keep nagging him about it. We would call it nagging. Jesus doesn't. But he said, man ought always to pray and not lose heart. That's Luke 18:1. And the purpose of that is, it's not that you need to keep reminding God. The prayer is changing you. That's the thing. The prayer changes the person. The more intense and more fervent the prayer, the more changes is coming to the individual. There's some kind of thing happening with God when you talk to God in such ways that about his case. The case is before him. You must wait for him. That's Lamentations 3 as well. It is good for a man to bear the yoke in his youth and to wait silently for the Lord, salvation. It is good for a man to bear the yoke, the hardship in his youth, and to quietly wait for his salvation, because we need patience. That's what James teaches. Trials are meant to bring about endurance and patience. That's what they're for. It's the only way you get it. You have to go through something hard to get patience. There's no what they call downloads. I hate that term, but downloads into the heart. No, patience is something that comes through struggle. Tribulation works patience, and this is what he's going through. Verse 15, and now because he has not visited in his anger, nor has he acknowledged transgression well, so Job opens his mouth emptily, and he multiplies words without knowledge. So he's saying, what Elihu is trying to do with these last words here, he wants Job to back off, because he doesn't want to be displeasing to God for the way he's going at God, saying that he's more right than God. That's not something God puts up with, because it's just not true, right? If it was true, he would acknowledge it. If it was true that we were more righteous than God, God would acknowledge it. But it was not true. Okay, so he multiplies words without knowledge, which is interesting because these are the words that the Lord uses in the whirlwind. Who is this that darkens my counsel with words without knowledge? He's almost repeating, he actually is repeating Elihu's own words. Elihu is never rebuked for what he's saying. So we can take him with a lot more confidence that he's not, he's on the ball here, with Job. And it sounds harsh. Like, one thing that I noticed about the book of Job was everybody's after him. Everybody's after him. Satan's after him. The Sabaeans are after him. The Chaldeans are after him. The fire of God is after him. The tornadoes are after him. The disease, the germs are after him. His three friends are after him. Elihu's after him, and God's after him. I mean, but again, God, of course, is not after him in the same way. I mean, all he wants to do is get something out of Job that he's been seeing and hearing all that time. And this was how he had to do it. And that's just the thing, It's like, I don't like thinking about all the stuff he was going through. I couldn't even handle 1% of it, I don't think, let alone 100% of it. So the man's got some real creds, they call it, right? There's a lot to him. He's got a lot of good, solid makeup for all of this. I mean, he's anyway. But we'll stop here, I suppose. That's I was hoping to get through two of them, but there's too many thoughts that came up. I thought, especially that little excursion there to that Matthew 9 and 10. So anyway, so at this point we'll take prayer requests. Okay.